So what I did was I found a video on YouTube of like a Christian talk show or some crap. And I started watching it to like glean some insight, like, you know, what are some points that I should touch on? What are people asking? Because it was like a question and answer type thing. And then this host, this Christian host who was answering the questions, went off the rails to the point where I can't not do a response video to it. I can't not do it. I'd feel like I was doing all of you guys a disservice by letting it go. So, this is a response video to Christians talking about sex before marriage. But before we get started, the usual garbage. If you want to help support me financially, because I do this part-time, you can find me on patreon.com/tattootheist. There's a lot of you guys on there, and you're helping out massively. I just had to get a new camera, and I would not have been able to afford it if it wasn't for you guys, so I appreciate that. Also, if you don't have me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all those places, you need to go do that, because I post different stuff to different places. You'll be in different conversations on different places, so if you don't have me everywhere, you probably should.
And I find it amazing that people want to treat sex as if it's something very casual, yet in hypocrisy, we want to condemn the rapist or the child molester when in fact we actually treat sex so cheaply.
Wait. Is this dude about to compare consensual sex between two adults to non-consensual sexual assault on a child or a woman? Is this about to be the argument? Oh, I hope to God it's not about to be the argument. It's about to be the argument.
One YouTuber commented, sex before marriage should not be a sin. If it were a sin, then why would we have sexual urges before we are married? The logical conclusion to such thinking is to assert that therefore every urge you have must be followed. I mean, I wonder if that person who wrote such a comment would tell the same thing to a pedophile or a rapist. I mean, they have urges.
What? Dude, what? What is wrong with this guy? Urges where two people consent and agree to engage in an action is not comparable. It's not comparable to where one person is not consenting, and so that person's either being raped, sexually and violently raped, or a child who they don't have the power to give consent. That's not comparable. You can't compare consensual sex with rape or child molestation. You have one scenario where two people are like smiling and happy and like moaning and groaning and getting their thing on. And you have one where like a child or a woman is crying and screaming and miserable, wants to fucking die. That's not comparable, bud.
Why then is rape wrong? Why then is pedophilia wrong?
Because it's not consensual. It's not agreed on. You're ripping away fundamental human rights, like right to self, right to body. It's not comparable to consensual sex. This is the dumbest argument I have ever heard in my life.
I think that just because you have urges, to say that acting on those urges is right because you have them is not only logically contradictory, but it's hypocrisy, especially when you want to call for punishment against the things that you call sin.
Dude wants to throw out the word logical when he's making the most illogical argument about this topic I have ever heard. Logically, the two are not comparable. Logically, any halfway functioning human being can see that consensual sexual intercourse cannot be logically compared to sexual violence. They are not the same thing. One is being agreed upon, one is being forced on somebody. Those are two totally separate things. Logically, there is nothing wrong with somebody wanting a pedophile or a rapist to go to prison for hurting somebody against their will while they have sex with somebody they're not married to within their will. That's not hypocritical.
Another YouTuber commented, urges, desires, passions. These are all natural human, emotional, and physiological events that everybody feels, not the devil's work. And they said, do you know why you want to have sex? Why? Because you love them. Because it's natural. Because love is universal. Why? Because it is true. In the same regard, this YouTuber asked, why is Christianity not universal?
I like this YouTuber. Why is Christianity not universal? That's a great question. It's one that I've been throwing around for a long time. Get it, girl. Let's see what Sparky's got to say about this one.
Well, again, you see that the basis of people's reasoning for arguing and defending such behavior is that they have the urges themselves. And I don't think that in any way that it's universal to say that such promiscuous behavior is accepted.
1. He did not answer the person's question. The argument wasn't about promiscuity at all. It was about physical relationship with somebody that user said they loved. That's the opposite of promiscuity. Like, definition for definition. They can't live in the same house. This dude is off the wall, man.
And then we have another YouTube comment. This person writes, Christians have specific rules for sex, which certain things like masturbation, thinking about women, and premarital sex. For the rest of us, those things that Christians call sin are completely normal and healthy, they say. And then they assert the Christian view is unhealthy. They have no better divorce rates than any other sect. Well, actually, that's not true. That's a prominent misconception about the statistic. In fact, a Harvard-trained researcher found that Christian marriages actually have a much lower divorce rate, in most cases closer to 15%.
I hate to be the one to bring this one to the ground. I want what he said to be true, but it's just not. It's not. What he did was, he did something that a lot of people in his position would do. He went out and he found one study that showed Christians have a significantly less likelihood of getting divorced. One study. Whereas if you take the compilation of like all the studies within the past 10 years, they average out to about 9% less likely to get divorced. 9%. 9% is, it's enough, like it's good. That's great, good for us, you know? Sweet. But it's not a lot. It's not significant. It's enough to be looked at, but it's not significant. It means we're doing something wrong too. And it's real aggravating that he just did that. That's like a typical play that people do when they debate somebody. Is they'll find a study so that they can say, oh, well, a Harvard study said, cool. The average of all studies on a topic show something very different. So that doesn't really matter.
Now finally, on to what the Bible says about this issue. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1 through 5 says, now regarding the questions you asked in your letter, yes, it is good to abstain from sexual relations. Verse 2, but because there is so much sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. So that the way to avoid sexual immorality is to be married. Therefore, the logical conclusion, not twisting Scripture, not trying to make it say what it doesn't say, Paul the Apostle is telling us that the way to avoid sexual immorality is through the covenant of marriage.
Yes, 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 yes. Here you go. We're about to rip this apart. I love that he said the word covenant, because a legal marriage is not the covenant of marriage. I'll talk about that in a minute. Actually, let me back up. Here's what he didn't do. He didn't practice any sort of exegesis on that at all. Because the reason Paul said that, more than likely, and everybody disagrees, but a lot agreed, that the reason he said that wasn't because they needed to be legally married. Go down to the courthouse, get that tax break. It's not what he was talking about. Paul was surrounded by these cultures of people and religions that were doing weird stuff with sex. A lot of like orgy stuff, sacrificial sex, like weird stuff that was involving more than just one person and one person. So many will argue what he's saying, and they'll say that Paul is really addressing the fact that there's a lot of weird sexual stuff going on. So that what Christians should do is they should commit to somebody, and you two should have each other's back, sex-wise. So that when you have urges come and you have, this or that, you have somebody to do that with, within like the bounds of the covenant that you two make with God, not with the state, not with the state of Illinois for a tax break. It's a covenant between you and God. When you go get a marriage license I've done this, I've been married and now I'm divorced. When you go get a marriage license, that's not a covenant. When you sign that, it's not a covenant. That's a contract. It's a legal contract from the state, not even the church, the state. That's not a covenant. Marriage is a covenant. It's cool, go get the paper on top of it. That's great. I love the tax break. But that paper doesn't do anything for you. Not religiously, not spiritually, and definitely not with anything in your relationship with God. because the paper doesn't mean anything anymore.
See, either we have standards or we don't. And everybody who says, well, you should be free, and they have kind of this hippie-like view on it, it really is not a very consistent standard at all. They'll point to things, and really the world is looking for a standard, an objective standard by which they can judge their own behavior. And apart from the scripture, you're left with really only two things. I mean, you'll see it in the YouTube comments in the last video, and I'm sure you'll see it in this one. They give you two very basic standards that they often go to, which are consent, and it has to do with if both of them agree, then it's okay. Well, why don't you try defending that when pedophiles are calling for the marriage to 8-year-olds that they want to have?
Oh my God, I'm done. I quit. Because an 8-year-old kid can't even microwave a Hot Pocket. They can't give consent for sex. Oh my God, I'm gonna lose it.
And then there's commitment. Well, if they're two people who are adults who love each other, even then, not all those commitments are objectively grounded in anything.
Here's the thing. I know plenty of Christians who have the piece of paper, but they are not married to their spouse. There's no covenant between them and God. They have the paper. So does that make their sex okay? I would say no. I also know many atheists who have the paper, and I know they're having sex. So is their sex sanctioned by God, even though they're not in covenant with Him? Does the legal piece of paper from the state in which you reside decide whether your physical intimacy with somebody else is sanctioned before God? Think about that. It's a double standard of It's covenant versus contract. A legal marriage is a contract. It's literally a legal document. You're signing legal paperwork. And you get legal stuff back, like tax breaks. But that's not a covenant. Unless while you're signing those papers with your spouse, you sit down intentionally and also enter into covenant with God with your spouse. I would say an easy 90% of Christians don't do that. See, I can think of two couples that I know, Christian. They've been together for a while, like years. They've been together for years. They decided not to get legally married because they didn't want their marriage to be based off the government or the state. They wanted their marriage to literally be a covenant with God, a spiritual covenant with God. No, I don't consider those people any less married than somebody who is married. I mean, just think about divorce. Think about divorce. You have sex with your spouse while you're married, while you have the stupid piece of paper. So then the minute your divorce goes through, does the sex while you were married, is that now sin? Because it would be easy to say that if you don't stay married, you weren't really married. You can't just back out of a covenant. You can back out of a contract, and it's going to cost you money. Those are the things you kind of have to struggle with. What actually is marriage? Is it the legal state document, or is it a covenant with God? Can you have one without the other? There are things you got to think about. Okay, I'll leave you with this, because I know this is probably going way too long. A user brought up the fact and said, well, what about Adam and Eve? Were they married? And I was like, tricky little... no, they were not married. But they had kids, and their kids had kids, and blah, blah, blah. They weren't married. If you take that story literally. If you think Adam and Eve, those actual people existed, or that it's loosely based off what actually happened. Either way, those two individuals, from what we know, were not married. But they did have God-sanctioned sex. That's all I got. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it made you think a little bit, at the very least. Just to think a little bit. That's really my only goal, is to force you to think, like minorly. That's all I ask for. Minor thinkage going on. But anyways, I love you guys. I'll see you whenever I can do this again. You know I try.